Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to unpack a term that's everywhere, the cloud. You use it every single day, probably, but what is actually going on beneath that simple name? We've gathered quite a stack of sources here, technical explanations, some history, even a slightly surprising pop culture reference. Our mission today is to get past the buzzword, really demystify what the cloud is, figure out where that name came from, and crucially, why understanding it better actually matters for you.
Exactly. And I think for listeners who follow tech, maybe you feel you already know this, but we're aiming to go a bit deeper than just the basic definition. We want to look at the whole paradigm shift it represents. It's really quite fascinating how something that feels so abstract, so, up there, has become completely fundamental to how we live and work digitally. It's reshaped entire industries.
Okay, so let's get right into unpacking that. We talk about clouds in the sky, obviously, and then we talk about the cloud on our phones or computers. Our sources make it really clear, though, this digital cloud isn't some kind of floaty, vaporous thing. So for people who are already kind of tracking this topic, what's the core insight from our sources? What is it, really?
Well, the simplest line, and it's actually very effective, is still that the cloud is just someone else's computer. But digging into our sources, the deeper point maybe isn't just whose computer, but the fundamental change it represents. It's this massive shift, right, from owning all your own computing gear to basically consuming computing like electricity or water as a utility.
Ah, okay. So less about the specific machine and more about the service model.
Precisely. And that shift impacts everything, from how a startup can even get off the ground without massive server investment to how huge companies scale globally. Underneath it all, yes, it refers to these huge networks of physical servers, real machines in real buildings, accessed over the internet. They handle the storage, the processing power, the applications, everything that's not happening directly on the device in your hand or on your desk.
That someone else's computer line really does cut through it. It's very clarifying. But okay, if it's so physical, these data centers and servers, where did this airy, light cloud metaphor actually originate? How did that become the term?
Yeah, that's a great question. The history sources we looked at, they pretty consistently point towards network diagrams. Back in the earlier days of the internet and networking, engineers needed a way to draw these complex systems. And when they got to the part of the network that was sort of external or managed by someone else, like the internet itself or a big telecom provider's network, they often just drew a cloud shape.
Seriously, just like a doodle.
Pretty much. It was visual shorthand. It basically meant this part is complex, it's out there, we don't need to detail the insides of it for this diagram. It symbolized the unknown, the remote infrastructure. And somehow, that simple drawing convention just stuck. It became the universally adopted term for this whole model of computing. Kind of amazing, really.
That is amazing. So it was literally just a quick way to draw all that stuff happening somewhere else.
Right.
Okay, so connecting that back to the bigger picture then, beyond just being someone else's hardware, what's the fundamental why? Why did this model become so dominant?
The why really boils down to a few core things.
Oh.
Access, agility, and massive efficiency gains. You look at definitions like Cloudflare's, for instance. They talk about it as a network of remote servers designed to store, manage, and process data. The key there is remote. This model essentially frees you, whether you're an individual or a massive company, from the burden of buying, housing, powering, cooling, and maintaining your own physical computer infrastructure.
Right, no more server rooms in the office basement,
Yeah.
maybe.
Exactly, or at least far fewer of them. Instead of that huge upfront capital expense and all the ongoing headaches, you're essentially renting capacity. You rent the storage you need, the processing power you need, the software you need, precisely when you need it, and often you only pay for what you actually use.
So translating that for you, the listener, when you're streaming a movie on Netflix or saving your photos to iCloud or Google Photos, or even just using webmail like Gmail, you're not running that software, storing that data on your own device, right? You're tapping into this massive, powerful, flexible infrastructure owned and operated by those companies. You don't need a server farm in your house.
Precisely, and that delivers huge benefits. Scalability is one. Services can handle millions of users because they can easily add more resources in the cloud. And accessibility is another. You can generally access your stuff from any device, anywhere, with an internet connection. It's incredibly convenient.
It feels so seamless now. It's easy to think this just sort of appeared recently with, Apple or Amazon or Google. But digging into the history, did our sources show this idea has deeper roots? Was this concept brewing for a while?
Oh, absolutely. It's a classic case of technological evolution, not sudden revolution. The core ideas go way back. Some sources trace the conceptual origins to the 1960s, believe it or not. A computer scientist named John McCarthy, a real pioneer in AI actually, he envisioned computing being delivered like a public utility somewhere.
Wow, the 60s. That's visionary.
It really was. Then you had ARPANET in 1969, the precursor to the internet, which was fundamentally about networked computers sharing resources. Fast forward to the 1990s, and you start seeing more concrete building blocks. Concepts like distributed computing, splitting tasks across many machines, and also grid computing, which was about pooling resources from lots of different computers, sometimes across different organizations, to tackle huge problems.
So these were kind of like early, maybe clunkier versions of what the cloud does now, trying to harness networked power.
Yeah, you could say that. They were laying the groundwork, exploring the possibilities, even if the technology wasn't quite there yet for the seamless experience we have today. Then, of course, came the dot-com boom and the bust.
Right, a period of huge hype, huge investment in internet ideas, and then a pretty hard correction. That must have impacted things.
It certainly did. It was a wild ride, and maybe a necessary one. It shook out some of the less viable ideas and forced a focus on more pragmatic, sustainable business models for online services. Interestingly, the term cloud computing itself seems to have been used internally at tech companies like AT&T in the 90s, but it really started gaining public traction with the rise of software as a service SaaS. Think Salesforce, founded back in 1999, delivering business software entirely over the web. That was a huge step.
Ah, so delivering the application itself, not just the raw infrastructure.
Exactly. But the real watershed moment for the modern cloud, the infrastructure side, was probably Amazon Web Services, AWS. When they launched in 2006, initially offering simple storage and computing services, it fundamentally changed the game. They made raw infrastructure available on demand, pay-as-you-go. That really popularized the infrastructure as a service, or IA, model. And then, of course, Google followed with App Engine in 2008, Microsoft with Azure in 2010, and the race was on.
It's quite a journey from a 60s vision to the massive industry we see today.
Yeah.
Thinking about the scale of it all, one of our sources brought up this really interesting, almost poetic contrast. It mentioned the actual weight of real clouds in the sky.
Ah, yes, the puffy clouds piece. That was fascinating.
Right. We think of clouds as these light, fluffy, weightless things drifting around. But that source pointed out a single average cumulus cloud. The puffy white ones can contain enough water to weigh hundreds of tons, maybe even millions of pounds.
It's an incredible number when you think about it. All that water vapor condensed up there.
Exactly. And it provides such a stark contrast to how we perceive the digital cloud, doesn't it? We experience it as totally intangible, weightless, just data.
It's a brilliant juxtaposition, actually, because the digital cloud feels weightless to you, the user, abstract, ethereal. But the reality behind that feeling is staggeringly physical and, yes, very, very heavy. We're talking about millions upon millions of servers, routers, switches, cooling systems, power infrastructure, all housed in these enormous buildings, these data centers that can be the size of multiple football fields, the sheer tonnage of metal, silicon, plastic, cabling. It's immense. So the perceived weightlessness is really an illusion, masking an incredibly dense, energy-hungry, and physically massive infrastructure.
That's a really powerful way to think about it. It grounds the concept in physical reality. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the convenience, the efficiency, the history, the good stuff. But like anything this pervasive, there must be downsides or risks, right? Our sources brought up, maybe slightly amusingly, the movie Sex Tape.
Ah, yes, the cautionary tale via comedy.
Right, where a personal video accidentally gets synced to the cloud and shared. While it was played for laughs, it does point to a very real concern for you, the listener, doesn't it? The risk side of things.
It absolutely does. And while that movie was obviously fictional and exaggerated, it inadvertently highlights a fundamental truth about cloud computing. When you use the cloud, you are inherently relying on someone else's computer. And that means you are entrusting your data, sometimes your most personal data, to that someone else. Convenience comes with a trade-off in direct control.
So security and privacy become really critical questions.
Paramount. Our sources definitely underscore this. If that third-party provider systems aren't adequately secured, if there's a breach, if there's a misconfiguration, or even just simple human error, your data could potentially be exposed, lost, or misused. It brings up really important considerations about, data sovereignty. Where is your data actually being stored physically, and whose laws apply to it?
Yeah.
And regulatory compliance are the services you use meeting the required standards for your industry or data type. And ultimately, it emphasizes the need for you to be vigilant, to understand the terms of service, the privacy policies, the security measures of any cloud service you rely on. Don't just click agree,
That's a crucial point. Convenience shouldn't mean complacency when it comes to your data. So wrapping this up then, it seems clear that whether you're consciously thinking about it or not, if you're online, you're interacting with the cloud constantly, storing photos, streaming music or video, working on shared documents, browsing websites. It's all deeply intertwined with this concept.
Absolutely. It's become an invisible backbone of the modern internet and much of modern life.
And at its heart, it really is just someone else's computer, a concept born from, surprisingly, a simple shape in old network diagrams. It has this history stretching back decades, built on layers of innovation and physical infrastructure.
Right. And I think the key takeaway for everyone listening is that while this invisible infrastructure is incredibly powerful, incredibly convenient, it's not magic. It demands our awareness of the security implications, the privacy trade-offs, and maybe even an appreciation for the sheer scale of the real-world machinery that makes that seemingly weightless digital experience possible.
So thinking about everything we've unpacked today, from the diagrams to the data centers, from the 60s vision to modern security concerns, what's the one thing about the cloud that stands out most to you now? We really hope this deep dive has maybe shifted your perspective a bit, made you feel more informed, and perhaps sparked a little more curiosity about the vast, complex, and very physical digital world humming away all around us.